top, front, and side. If I click on top, ooh, everything goes dark. That's because we're still trying to view this in a lit mode. If we shift it over to brush wireframe, we get the exact same type of viewport we had a second ago. Now, I like working this way because sometimes when I'm limited on screen space, I like having one big viewport. So as we proceed through these next couple of videos, you'll probably see me switching back and forth a lot between top and side and perspective and just changing out my modes for what particular mode I'm in. Or what particular view I'm in, excuse me. Okay, so now we have our room in place. The first thing I need to do is get the red builder brush out of the way. We could, of course, take the red builder brush, move it over here to the side someplace, and create another subtraction. However, if we did that, we'd have to go through the motions of retexturing this new room that we created. So what I'm going to do is get the red builder brush completely out of the way. I'm going to click on the walls of this room to select the brush that is defining it. We actually created a piece of geometry called a subtractive brush when we clicked the subtraction button earlier, and we have a light within that too. So we'll make a marquee selection to grab everybody, so you can hold down Control and Alt and just left-click drag across both of these objects, and notice now we have the room and we have the light selected. Now what I want to do is create a duplicate. There's a couple of ways to do this. We can go under Edit, and we can choose Duplicate, or my favorite method is to hold down Alt and just move something. So I'm holding down the Alt key, we'll move the mouse over this green arrow, and then left-click drag off to the right, and notice we immediately get a second copy. Alright, so I'm going to move this over, and I haven't let go of the mouse button yet. So if you've let go of the mouse button, you might want to delete what you just created and drag along with me. I want you to cut your eyes down to the bottom of your viewport, and you'll notice there's a little tiny field right about the middle center of your viewport that tells you how far you're moving your object. If I move it right back to where we started, it says no change. It says no change. And I start to truck it over to the right, we start getting a numerical value. If you want to follow along with me exactly, you want to move this room and this brush over 640 units, like so. So I let go of the mouse at 640, and there we go.
Now go ahead and take your mouse down to the area and just kind of highlight it down there at the bottom. Yeah, this is the area that was updating just a second ago.
That's right. By default, this is only going to give you the coordinates of your mouse if you're not moving anything. In fact, just to really drive it home, make sure everybody got to see, I'll go ahead and delete that room really quickly. We'll do a Control-Alt-Drag.
So watch down at the bottom. Once again, it's going to change over to position when he begins moving. So it's position, and you can see that center number, Y, updating as he is moving this.
There we go. All right, so now I have two rooms. Or do I? Let's go back over to the perspective viewport, and I'll switch on lit mode once again. So here's the room that we started out in. I'm going to move our mouse out of here, and look at this. We have one room which is actually working for us and looking pretty good, and another room which is just an empty wireframe. This has to do with the building of geometry. And internally, we have duplicated this room. We've also duplicated the light, but Unreal hasn't taken the time to create the geometry of these walls. Right now, the framework is in place, but there's still one part left to do, which is actually create the surfaces that we've defined. So what I'm going to do really quick is click on the Build Geometry for Current Level button located up here in the toolbar. This will take just a second. We'll get some warnings, but don't worry about these just yet. They're not really important. First, it says that paths need to be rebuilt, but we haven't created any bot pathing at this point, so that's irrelevant. And then it says lighting needs to be rebuilt, but we're not really working with lights right now anyways. So we can just close this window altogether, and suddenly we have two rooms. Now, that's all well and good, and definitely nice to have two rooms available to us, but we don't really have a way to get from one room to the next.
And that seems to me that it would be kind of important.
That's problematic anyway. So let's create a hallway that will join the two rooms together. What I'm going to do is go back over to my Cube Builder button that we had over here inside the toolbox, and we'll right-click on this one more time. And in the X direction, I'm going to set this to 256. In Y, we're going to set this to 128. And in Z, we're going to set this to 192. Let's go ahead and build. Now, you need to find your red builder brush, so if you moved it way out of the way, you're going to notice that it's kind of floating out here. I'm going to jump into my top view to help me position this
up, yep.
And then we'll set this back over to wireframe view so we can see everything. Now, here's my red builder brush. We need to move this right in between our two walls. Now, it's possible, if you got your numbers out of order when you were following along, that you have a brush that's oriented in a different way. And just to really show you how that might work, if you accidentally switch 256 and 128, like we said, maybe 128 in X and 256 in Y, when we build, our hallway is actually pointing in the wrong direction. It's not going to fit exactly between these two surfaces like we want it to. If that's the case, you can either, of course, rebuild in the different dimensions, or as an alternative, you could rotate this brush around. If you tap the space bar, you'll notice your widget is going to change shape. And it really has three forms that you can cycle through. It has the translation widget for moving things, it has the rotation widget for rotating, and it has the scale widget for changing the size of objects. We're going to tap it over until we get the rotation widget, and then put your mouse over the blue ring, which will rotate our object in the z-axis, and we'll just drag this off to the right until we are rotated vertically, the way that we want this brush to be oriented. Let's go ahead and tap the spacebar 2 more times to get back to translate mode. And what I want you to do is make sure that your brush fits exactly between these 2 brushes. Now this requires that we take just a moment and talk for a moment about snapping. You'll notice that as I move my brush around, I'm jumping between major grid points. If for some reason you are not snapping to grid points the way you should be, you need to go up under your view menu and make sure that under drag grid, 1, you are using the drag grid. Whenever you're working with brushes like we are, you should always have your drag grid active.
Always use it.
And in my case, I'm snapping to every 16 units. If you have a different value, you might want to set to 16. Now, just as an example, if I set this to 4 units for a moment, and we'll just offset our brush slightly so that the next time when I go back to 16, go back into the view menu, make sure we're back at 16, you'll notice I really can't get these brushes to line up exactly. It just won't snap to save my life. You can fix that by right-clicking on any one corner of the brush. It's going to move your translation widget to that corner, but it's also going to snap the whole brush back to the grid. So if you're having a hard time getting brushes to align to the grid, you can just right-click on a corner and it'll take care of it for you. Okay, now with your snapping set to 16, make sure that your brushes are all nicely snapped perfectly wall to wall. And you might want to zoom really close in and make sure that they are right on top of each other. You don't want any gaps and you don't want any overlapping. That's critical. In fact, if you have a gap, you won't actually get a hallway.
That's right.
You'll still have a wall there. Okay, before we show how cool this actually is, let's get out of top view mode. We'll go back to perspective. We'll switch back over to lit mode, and we'll take a look at what we're about to chop out. Now, if you take a look at this, our brush doesn't go all the way down to the floor.
Yeah, we're up in the air, so there's going to be a bit of a step up into this hallway.
That's right, and for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and leave that. Let's come over to our subtract button, and we'll click it one more time, and boom. Couple of interesting things happened. First off, we did get a nice little hole cut in between our 2 rooms, exactly like I was hoping we would. But take a look at these surfaces. They have a material already applied. They don't have that default gray checker texture.
Yeah, Zach, it looks like it's the last material that you had used or had selected in your generic browser.
That's exactly right. The last material that you have selected will be applied to any new brushes you create. Now, I don't really want this hallway to have a step up, so let's fix this now. What I'm going to do is go back into an orthographic view, and this time I think I'm going to pick on the front view, and we'll switch back over to brush wireframe mode, and we can see our 2 rooms, and we can see the red builder brush in between them. However, if I move the builder brush, nothing is going to change because that hallway has been defined by a subtractive brush that I just created. So what I need to do is select this subtractive brush, and I can pull it down just a couple of grid spaces until it's even with the floor.
Now, a very important thing to point out, let's go and switch back over to our perspective view and then back into a lit state and take a look at this. We still don't see an update of our geometry. Even though we've taken the subtractive builder brush and we've moved it down flush with the floor, we don't see the geometry updating properly. But just a second ago, you saw when we carved out the hallway, we instantly saw the geometry update properly. Well, that is because when we use subtract or add brushes in, everything does update.
Right.
It's like a quick rebuild on that geometry right there. But when you go in there and physically manipulate your subtractive or additive brushes, as we are doing here, you're going to need to rebuild that geometry to see the update take place.
That's right, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll just click on Build Geometry for current level, give it just a moment, we'll close out of our little warning. Notice this, we get a new warning here that says Run Clean BSP Materials to clear 2 unnecessary material references. Now, what on earth does that mean? Well, we created this hallway the same way we created these rooms. We've created a subtractive brush which defines this negative space, this carving out of mass. There are 2 walls here that we actually don't see that are being calculated. That's a bit of a problem, and Unreal can fix that for us if we go under Tools and choose Clean BSP Materials. And notice it says Clean 2 BSP Material References, check Log Window for further details. That's okay, we'll just take its word for it. Alright, the last thing we really need to do is clean up the materials on this hallway. It looks a little out of place to have the roof material on all 4 of the visible surfaces.
It does.
And we'll go ahead and leave it there for the ceiling part. That looks fine, but we need to apply the wall texture and the floor texture to their respective panels. there's a shortcut to do this. It'll make our lives a lot easier if we don't want to have to dig these out of the generic browser again. I'm going to select any one of the walls that have this wall material applied. We're going to hold down Alt and right-click on the surface. Then if I come over to our hallway, I can hold down Alt and left-click on the surface, and the material that I right-clicked on will get applied. So let's move over here. I'll Alt and left-click on this wall, and there we go. Now if I Alt-click on the floor, we also apply it to the floor, so we don't want to do that. So I'm going to select the floor, I'm going to Alt right-click, then Alt left-click here on the floor, and there we go.
Very nice.
But we still have one little bit of a problem in that the tiling is now off. This surface is tiling a little bit heavier than the rest of the floor, as are the walls. So what I'm going to do is select the floor, hold down Control, select the two walls. Now I'll press F5 again to open up my Surface Properties window, and notice it has kept my setting from the last time I used the window, where simple scaling is set to 2. Just click Apply, and then close the window, and you'll notice that has solved the problem. Because
Much better.
Now everybody's tiling to the same size. And with that, we are essentially done. There's only one last thing remaining, and it's a really nitpicky thing, and that's that we can see the seam between these surfaces. There is a way to fix that. Let's go ahead and select our floor. And I'll right-click on the floor, go to Select Surfaces, and we'll choose All Adjacent Floors, which is really handy. Just grabs everybody at once. Now, let's jump back into our Surface Properties window. And down here under Alignment, we can choose Planar, which is going to automatically align all of the textures on this surface to a single plane. Click Apply, and now that seam is gone, but our scaling is a bit off. So if we look really close, you can no longer see any seam here on the floor. So if we want that scaling back, just make sure with Simple set to 2, we go ahead and reapply.
Look at that. Very nice.
And with that, we can close the Surface Properties window, and all of our materials are applied, and this stage of our level creation is done. So we'll go ahead and end this video at this point, and then in the next video, we'll talk about how we can start decorating this level and start making it look a little less bland by adding static meshes.